I sat at the edge of the dining table, watching my brother, Ryan, laugh with Dad like he owned the world. Every word I said seemed to vanish into thin air. Mom barely glanced at me, her eyes fixed on Ryan, praising him for every tiny achievement. I felt like I didn't exist. Every day, they reminded me I was worthless. Not a single word of encouragement, not a single gesture of love. Just mockery and disappointment. I tried to speak up once, and Dad laughed, saying, "Don't bother, Jeff. You'll never measure up." The words burned inside me. I wanted to run away, but I stayed. I had to see how far their favoritism would go. Ryan had everything, the toys, the attention, the mansion they promised him, the cars, the respect. And me? Nothing. I swallowed my anger, forcing a smile I didn't feel. I knew something deep inside me whispered, this wasn't the end. One day, they would see. One day, they'd regret thinking I was nothing. They had no idea what was coming. Before I tell you how I got my revenge, hit that like button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this ends. A week later, I found it. Hidden behind Dad's old books on the top shelf, a thick envelope with my name written in perfect, bold letters, Jeff Stephen. My heart pounded. I tore it open, careful not to make a sound. Inside were papers, legal-looking and official. My eyes widened as I scanned the first lines. To my son, Jeff Stephen, my real father, the one I never knew, had left me everything. $600 million. Properties across the country. Stocks, cars, and a private jet. I couldn't breathe. They had treated me like I was nothing, but now, the truth hit me like lightning, I had power. They thought I was weak, invisible, worthless. They didn't see me coming. The world they built around Ryan, filled with praise and attention, was mine to shake if I wanted. I sat there in silence, clutching the letter like it was a lifeline. Anger mixed with disbelief, then a slow, cold determination spread through me. I would never forget their cruelty. But now, I held the weapon they never imagined. The game had changed. And I intended to play it to win. I stayed quiet for days, pretending everything was normal. At family dinners, they laughed at Ryan, bragged about his mansion, his cars, his life. I smiled politely, hiding the fire inside. They had no idea that I had a fortune waiting for me, a fortune they could never touch. Every joke they made, every smug glance, fueled my plan. I started keeping notes, who said what, who trusted whom, every weakness and every prideful boast. My brother, Ryan, thought he was untouchable. My parents thought I was still the same, nothing, they ignored. But the moment I got the keys to my real inheritance, everything would shift. I imagined it, their faces turning pale, their voices trembling. I would move quietly, smartly, without a sound, until the empire they built around themselves started crumbling. The small hints of power I could wield already thrilled me. It wasn't revenge yet, it was strategy. I had patience. I would wait for the perfect moment, and when it came, they wouldn't know what hit them. The world had underestimated me once. That mistake would be repeated, only this time, I would make sure it destroyed them from the inside. If you like our revenge stories, please subscribe for more. We drop powerful news stories every week, filled with truth, emotion, and justice. Don't miss the next one. And remember, some stories hurt, but they heal too. Subscribe now, and join the journey. I started small and careful so no one would notice. First I opened a secret bank account under a new name. Each week I moved a little money from odd jobs and tips into that account. It was slow but it built hope. I spent more time at the warehouse and listened. Workers told me things they never said in front of my family. Eddie, who drove the forklift, became my friend. He showed me which contracts were most important and which managers lied. I learned where the company kept paper files and how shipments were logged. I wrote notes and kept them locked in my glove box. At home I pretended to be the same quiet son. I smiled while Ryan bragged about cars and parties. Inside, I planned. My plan was not to shout or fight. It was to collect facts, money, and allies. I would use smart moves, not anger. Tomorrow I would meet a woman who said she could help with old legal papers. For now, I waited and kept working. Soon their proud faces would be the last thing they ever celebrated in public. I met her at a coffee shop near the docks the next morning. She wore simple clothes but her eyes were sharp. "Jeff Stephen?" she asked. I nodded. "I am Nadia Cortez. I knew your father. He wanted you to have what was rightfully yours." Her voice was calm but full of meaning. She slid a thin folder across the table. Inside were copies of papers, old letters, and a record of a will. "Rodrigo left clear instructions," Nadia said. "He made arrangements so the truth could be found when the time came." My hands trembled as I read a short note from Rodrigo that said he watched me from afar and always hoped I would be strong. Nadia explained she worked with his lawyers and kept quiet because Rodrigo feared my mother would stop him. She also gave me a list of people who knew small facts that could prove paternity if needed. I asked why she would help me. She smiled and said, "Because he asked me to, and because no child should be hidden." Leaving the shop, I felt less alone. For the first time in my life, someone believed me and had proof. Hope mixed with plan, and I felt ready to move forward. I spent the night thinking about Nadia's files. Every document, every letter, and every name could be a weapon. I realized my family had never treated me like a person, they saw me as nothing. But now, I had proof, and that changed everything. The next morning, I started calling the contacts Nadia had listed. Each conversation was careful, calm, and calculated. I had to make sure they would stand by the truth if the moment came. One by one, people I never thought I'd meet, lawyers, old friends of my father, even former business partners, agreed to help. I wrote down notes, memorized their words, and planned exactly how to confront my family. Then came the hardest part, approaching my brother, Brandon. He was arrogant, spoiled, and believed he owned everything. I had to be patient, or my plan would crumble. I told myself I would not raise my voice or act hastily. Every move had to be silent, precise, and unstoppable. Today, I would test the waters. I would speak carefully, ask questions, and see how easily he could be shaken. Revenge was no longer a thought, it was a strategy, and I had all the pieces in place. Brandon walked into the living room like he owned the world. The new car, the mansion, and the designer suit made him feel untouchable. I stayed quiet, watching him closely, letting his arrogance fill the air. He laughed about our childhood, mocking the fact that I had never amounted to anything. My jaw tightened, but I didn't respond. I couldn't waste words, every reaction had to be measured. Instead, I asked him subtle questions about Dad's old business ventures, casually mentioning things only someone with insider knowledge would know. His eyes narrowed, but he tried to play it cool. The cracks started to show. He stammered, hesitated, and revealed more than he intended. Each word he said added fuel to my plan. I made mental notes, storing every detail for later. This was the first taste of his vulnerability, and I could feel the momentum shifting. He believed he had power over me, but the reality was different. I had patience, information, and the quiet determination that comes from years of being underestimated. Revenge wasn't about anger, it was about strategy, and Brandon was already stepping into my trap. Today was the start of his unraveling. I began to act like nothing was different. At work I kept my head down and watched. I learned which managers were lazy and which ones cheated. I used small favors to build loyalty. Eddie trusted me, so I helped him with overtime forms. He told me secrets about hidden shipments and false invoices. I wrote everything in a little notebook and kept it safe. At home I smiled when Brandon bragged. I let him talk about parties and the new yacht. Inside, I used the names Nadia gave me to call old friends who remembered my real father. I met a private investigator, one who checked old records and photos. He found a hair sample at a barber shop and matched it to the papers Nadia had. The proof was slow, but it grew stronger. Each day I planted small doubts in the right ears. A manager I helped now mentioned a misplaced file in a casual talk. A lawyer I called asked about old payments. Nobody noticed the pattern. It was like a quiet seed growing into a tree. Soon my small moves would become a forest that could not be ignored. Weeks passed, and my quiet plan grew stronger. I met with Nadia again, this time in a library where no one from my family would ever go. She handed me a small USB drive filled with scanned documents, bank statements, and hidden contracts. Each file linked my real father to assets my parents didn't even know about. I stared at the screen, feeling the weight of what I held. At home, Brandon's arrogance reached new heights. He threw a party at the mansion, inviting politicians and businessmen just to show off. I walked through the rooms, silent and invisible, but taking pictures of every guest, every deal, every whispered promise. These were the people he trusted most, and the ones who would turn on him when the truth came out. I also met with the private investigator again. He confirmed paternity results. Rodrigo Stevens was my biological father. The papers, the DNA, the witness statements, everything was lining up. I felt my anger cooling into focus. Revenge was no longer just a dream. It was becoming a case built like stone. Soon my family would realize they had built their empire on lies. And I was ready to take it apart. I picked my moment. At the company meeting when leaders met with clients, I stood and asked a simple question about a shipment date. They laughed, thinking it was a small error. But I had the papers from Nadia and the USB drive. I calmly showed a copy of a contract that proved a major payment was missing. Faces went quiet. The client frowned and asked for proof. I handed the USB to the company lawyer who had come to the meeting. He plugged it into his laptop and saw the documents. Gasps moved through the room. Brandon's face turned red. He tried to lie, but details on the screen matched my notes. People who trusted him began to doubt. After the meeting, whispers followed him down the hall. I did not shout or brag. I sat with a calm that felt sharp as glass. The first crack in his armor was there. It was small, but real. I felt a strange calm watching his confident steps slow. The game had begun, and nothing would stop it now. I held 10 more proofs and planned each move carefully. Soon their world would fall apart. I met with Clara Ruiz, the lawyer Nadia recommended. She sat across from me with a folder full of papers and a calm face. "These documents are strong," she said. "We can prove paternity and challenge the will." I told her about Rodrigo's notes, the DNA, and the USB files. Clara nodded and wrote down dates and names. She explained how the law works and how long things could take. I asked if we could move faster. She smiled and said, "Only with care. Fast mistakes can ruin a case." We made a plan. Clara would file a quiet petition to open an estate review in Miami. She would also send legal letters to protect any assets while we worked. I watched her work and felt a new kind of hope. For the first time, law was on my side, not my parents'. Clara warned me to be patient and to avoid public shows of anger. "Let them make mistakes," she said. "We will use them." I left the office feeling steady. With Clara, my small moves became legal force. The next step was court papers to force the family to face the truth. I received the first shock in the mail, a formal notice that the estate was being reviewed. My stepmother, Alicia, opened it first, thinking it was junk. She called Rodrigo, panicked. "What is this?" she whispered. I watched from across town, keeping calm. The lawyers had filed quietly, just enough to rattle them. Rodrigo tried to dismiss it, saying, "Jeff has no claim. It's ridiculous." But I knew fear when I saw it. Alicia was pale, trembling. They realized the documents, the DNA, the truth. They couldn't ignore me anymore. I stayed patient, smiling quietly. My revenge didn't need yelling or confrontation. The law was my weapon, and it was already slicing their comfort. I started getting updates from Clara daily. Every motion, every response, every lawyer's note gave me satisfaction. The family's empire of wealth and pride was shaking. All their arrogance, their mocking me, their belief that I was nothing, it was backfiring. They had built their empire thinking I was weak, but I had the real power now. And I wasn't done. The next steps would dismantle their control completely. Rodrigo called a family meeting at the mansion. He wanted to show strength, but I could feel the cracks forming even from afar. Alicia whispered constantly, afraid of every knock, every phone call. They knew the estate review wasn't a bluff. Brandon, my older brother, tried to act confident. "Jeff can't do anything. It's a waste of time," he said, slamming his glass on the table. But his eyes betrayed him. Fear lingered there. They were starting to realize I had the real claim, the true bloodline that mattered. I watched it all quietly. My friend Clara sent me photos and notes of every subtle argument, every raised voice. It was poetic, seeing them crumble from within. They had spent decades mocking me, calling me a failure, and now their own fear became the prison they couldn't escape. The first small victories came as whispers among their advisors. Some lawyers and accountants subtly shifted, ensuring they were prepared for me. I had planted patience and observation into every step. My revenge wasn't immediate, but it was precise. Every family fracture, every whispered doubt, every nervous glance, they were all pieces falling perfectly into place. I knew I couldn't fight this battle alone. Clara recommended a network of lawyers, investigators, and financial experts who could quietly handle the estate, tracing every loophole and hidden account. They were invisible, working behind the scenes, like shadows I controlled. Meanwhile, I had to stay hidden. Brandon continued his arrogant lifestyle, unaware that every decision he made was being quietly monitored. Every new car, every property investment, every extravagant dinner, it was being logged, analyzed, and used to my advantage. Alicia grew paranoid. She sent subtle messages to friends, trying to gather sympathy, but every word I intercepted through discreet channels. It wasn't just about money, it was about dismantling their arrogance, their belief that I was powerless. The real beauty of revenge was patience. Each small piece of information became a weapon. Each misstep they made, thinking I was nothing, added to my arsenal. I smiled quietly, knowing that soon, the dominoes would fall, and their empire of arrogance would collapse without me lifting a finger in anger. The notice of the estate review reached the family attorneys. Panic spread. Even Brandon was sweating, muttering about delays and mistakes. They had never seen me this calm. I wasn't fighting emotionally, I was fighting strategically. Clara delivered the first set of financial documents I requested. Accounts I didn't even know existed were suddenly mine to explore. Every transfer, every hidden fund, every luxurious property, my father had left me everything. And now, it was time for me to claim it properly. Rodrigo and Alicia were running out of options. Their arrogance was crumbling. Brandon kept arguing, but no one listened. Their empire, built on my exclusion, was starting to bend under the truth. I sent subtle messages through lawyers and accountants, hinting at moves they couldn't yet understand. Anxiety gripped them. They realized I wasn't just claiming money, I was reclaiming the respect they had stolen through mockery and neglect. For the first time, I felt the power of being underestimated. It was intoxicating. Every silent action, every calculated step, every hidden ally, it all built to this moment. The family who had treated me like nothing was finally seeing me as the force I truly was. Brandon's once confident smirk vanished as rumors reached him. Whispers circulated in his circles. Jeff Stephen had real power, hidden alliances, and unstoppable momentum. Every friend he trusted began to second-guess him. The arrogance that had defined him all these years was cracking. I stayed calm, watching from a distance. Clara sent updates every hour. The attorneys were subtly maneuvering behind the scenes, ensuring no hasty decision could derail the plan. Every whispered warning, every nervous glance Brandon gave Alicia, was another sign of the slow unraveling. Rodrigo tried to assert control, sending ultimatums and threats. But even he hesitated now, unsure if his words carried any weight. They had underestimated me for decades, calling me worthless, dismissing my existence. Now, that same dismissal became their weakness. I carefully seeded doubts among their advisors. Small leaks, subtle reminders, hints of legal vulnerabilities. They panicked in private but pretended to be composed publicly. Their empire was built on confidence and arrogance, and I was eroding both silently. Patience was my greatest weapon. Every hesitant decision they made, every fear-driven move, only advanced my strategy. They thought they were still in control, but every moment, every whisper, was shaping the endgame in my favor. The first public announcement came as a shock. The estate review had officially begun. Brandon froze as the notice arrived, and Rodrigo nearly fainted when they saw the meticulous legal documentation. Every clause, every line, favored me. I had spent months preparing this, and now it was happening. Clara coordinated with accountants to make sure every financial statement, every hidden asset, was highlighted without revealing my hand. The family advisors scrambled, trying to counter moves they didn't understand. Brandon called Alicia in a panic. "We can't lose this. Jeff has no right." His voice trembled. Alicia's face was pale. She realized their control over the inheritance had been an illusion all along. I smiled quietly. They had dismissed me for too long, mocked my ambition, and never considered I had strategy and patience. Now, each misstep they had taken in the past would haunt them in the present. The power shift was subtle but unmistakable. From the outside, it appeared like minor legal moves, but the reality was clear. I was reclaiming everything that had been denied. And the fear in their eyes told me the game had truly begun. Brandon and Rodrigo began arguing publicly, trying to appear confident but failing miserably. Alicia tried to mediate, but her fear made her ineffective. I observed quietly, letting them implode on their own. The attorneys were careful, showing no bias but ensuring every legal advantage tilted toward me. My father's hidden letters, my rightful claims, they were emerging slowly, like smoke through cracks in a wall. Brandon's once commanding presence faded. He yelled, slammed doors, and tried to manipulate advisors, but every attempt backfired. His arrogance, which had kept me powerless for so long, became the very thing that exposed him. I kept my hands clean. I didn't argue. I didn't threaten. I simply let the law, the truth, and the weight of my father's fortune do the talking. The whispers, the side glances, the nervous laughter, it all signaled one thing: the empire of mockery was starting to crumble. The beauty of revenge was watching it unfold naturally. Years of pain, rejection, and humiliation were finally turning into satisfaction. The family who had treated me like nothing could no longer pretend they were safe from consequences. Rodrigo finally admitted defeat on small fronts. Property transfers and bank account adjustments quietly began, with Brandon's furious protests ignored by everyone. Their bravado had vanished entirely. Alicia, once smug and controlling, now looked exhausted. Every glance, every whispered call, betrayed anxiety. She realized the balance of power had shifted entirely, and it wasn't shifting back. Clara sent me updates with a sense of triumph. "They're finally realizing the truth," she wrote. I smiled at her words, knowing patience had paid off. Every delayed action, every silent move, had culminated in this moment. I wasn't done yet. My father's estate included secrets and assets even they didn't know existed. Every step forward revealed more leverage I could use to assert dominance. Brandon and Rodrigo's arrogance had built the foundation of their downfall. They never considered I could be methodical and relentless. The first concessions were only the beginning. Their power, their wealth, and their influence were slowly slipping through their fingers. Soon, every mocking word, every dismissive laugh, every insult they had hurled at me would be repaid tenfold, quietly, strategically, and completely. The estate review reached a tipping point. Advisors whispered, documents circulated, and Brandon's confidence hit rock bottom. Every move he made was countered by legal facts and evidence that he couldn't dispute. Rodrigo attempted threats, but his words sounded hollow. Alicia's pale face betrayed fear as they realized the full scope of my claim. The family had treated me like nothing for decades, and now every ounce of power I had gained was undeniable. I remained calm, letting them squirm. The victory wasn't loud, it didn't require shouting. It was in the quiet confirmations from lawyers, in the subtle shifts in bank ownership, and in the silent acknowledgement from those who had once underestimated me. Clara celebrated with me privately, understanding the significance. Every insult, every betrayal, every mocking laugh had led to this moment. My father's fortune, my rightful inheritance, was finally mine. The best part? I had not lost myself to anger. Revenge was not about shouting or spectacle, it was about patience, precision, and making the arrogant realize they were powerless. And now, they were learning that lesson the hard way. The first news of the inheritance spread quietly among close circles, but it quickly reached the media. Brandon's smug persona vanished as whispers of my legal claim became headlines. The family's secrecy was shattered. Rodrigo's attempts to spin the story failed. Advisors advised silence, but the damage was done. Brandon's social circle treated him with cold distance, unsure what was real or fabricated. Alicia tried to maintain control but her fear was visible. I did not celebrate publicly, the satisfaction was private, strategic. Each headline, each awkward conversation, reinforced my silent victory. My father's fortune, my rightful claim, was now confirmed and recognized. Friends and allies began congratulating me. Clara smiled knowingly, every detail we had managed together had paid off. The patience, the planning, and the years of quiet suffering were finally validated. Brandon realized the magnitude of his mistake. He had mocked me, dismissed me, and treated me like nothing, but the world was now acknowledging the truth. Power, respect, and wealth were no longer illusions for him, they were gone, quietly but irreversibly. Brandon's arrogance finally snapped. He argued with advisors, tried to leverage influence, and begged family friends for help. Every attempt failed. Rodrigo tried to mediate, but his words carried no weight. Alicia's support faltered, her trust in him was shaken. The family's confidence, built over decades, crumbled under the weight of truth. Legal documents, letters from my father, and clear financial evidence left no room for dispute. Every asset, every bank account, every property slowly transferred into my name. Brandon and Rodrigo's protests were futile. Even their allies started to distance themselves. The arrogance that had shielded them for years was gone. In public, they smiled, but in private, fear and regret dominated every conversation. I watched silently, savoring the slow unraveling. Revenge was never about shouting, it was about letting justice unfold. And as Brandon realized that the world had finally recognized my worth, the satisfaction of triumph was complete. The estate's final settlements were signed. Brandon and Rodrigo had no legal recourse. Alicia, once confident, quietly accepted the reality, they had underestimated me. Clara, my closest ally, ensured every last detail was correct. Every asset, property, and bank account was accounted for. Nothing was overlooked. Brandon tried one last desperate attempt to challenge the will, but the legal team had anticipated every move. His efforts backfired, further embarrassing him publicly and privately. The family that had treated me as worthless now had to acknowledge my rightful claim. The power, respect, and influence they had wielded over me for decades had quietly shifted into my hands. It was a victory not just of wealth but of dignity. Every insult, betrayal, and mocking word had transformed into leverage. They had underestimated me, and their downfall was complete. I walked through the family estate, now fully mine, absorbing the magnitude of what had been reclaimed. Years of rejection, dismissal, and humiliation were now replaced by recognition and power. Brandon, Rodrigo, and Alicia kept their distance, no longer able to influence my life. Their arrogance had blinded them to the truth, and their silence was the ultimate acknowledgement. Clara and I planned the next steps carefully, preserving the legacy while expanding influence. Every decision I made honored my father's intentions and my own patience. I didn't gloat publicly. Revenge was quiet, precise, and complete. The satisfaction came in the subtle acknowledgement of power, the respect of allies, and the embarrassment of those who had once treated me as nothing. Every moment of struggle had led to this reclaiming of legacy, fortune, and dignity. They had laughed at me, but now, the laughter had died quietly, leaving only respect and acknowledgement of my rightful place. Finally, the world saw me as I had always been, capable, intelligent, and deserving. Brandon's smirk was gone, Rodrigo's influence vanished. Alicia's control had crumbled. I sat quietly in my office, reflecting on every step, the insults, the betrayals, the years of being dismissed. Every challenge had become a lesson, every setback a tool. Patience and strategy had turned the tide. The $600 million inheritance was more than money, it was justice, validation, and freedom. My father's trust, long hidden, had empowered me beyond their imagination. Brandon and Rodrigo lived with the knowledge that they had lost, silently acknowledging their mistake. Their arrogance had been their downfall. I didn't need to yell, expose them publicly, or create drama. The quiet, unstoppable strategy had done it all. The ultimate revenge is satisfaction without chaos, triumph without spectacle. I had been treated like nothing, but now, the world recognized my worth. My father's legacy was mine, and my quiet triumph stood as a reminder, never underestimate the one you dismiss. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe for more powerful narratives, and share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear what part hit you the hardest. Thanks for watching.